Camera out, baby. Watch me put the trash back where it belongs.
The luxury SUV swerved hard toward the flooded curb. In the passenger seat, a glamorous woman was already filming, already laughing. 1 second later, a wall of muddy water crashed over the woman walking alone on the sidewalk. "Oh my God, tell me you got that." She got every second of it. And he knew exactly who they had just drenched. His ex-wife. The woman who built his company from nothing before he threw her away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked straight into that camera for 1 second, blinked, and walked away. What he didn't know, within 48 hours, that one puddle would cost him a $12 billion deal and everything he had ever built. So tell us in the comments, if someone humiliated you like this in public, what would you do? And if you love stories where karma signs the contract, subscribe, because this one is just getting started. Scottsdale, Arizona. A wet Tuesday in March, rare rain and gutters running brown with a season of dust. Her name was Camille Kane, 36 years old. 1 hour earlier, she had been closing out a charity luncheon at the Scottsdale Regent, 90 guests, and a leather folder of donation pledges that represented 4 months of her work. The luncheon had gone beautifully, which is exactly why she didn't go straight to the car. She told her driver she wanted to walk a few blocks. She'd call when she was ready, because 2 blocks from that hotel stood a small storefront. 9 years ago, a company had been born behind that glass. Her hands had built it. Her name had never gone on it. She hadn't walked this street since the divorce. 3 years of taking the long way around an entire city. Today, she wanted to know if that little building still had power over her. She stood in front of it for almost a minute. New awning, somebody else's window, and inside her chest, nothing. Just a place where something used to live. It didn't. She turned back toward the hotel and started walking to her real life. Understand, this was his side of town. His office sat 3 blocks east. This had been his morning route for 9 years. She had known all of that when she chose the walk. It was part of the test. That was when she heard the engine change its mind. Garrett Voss saw her from half a block away. 3 years, and he still recognized the walk before he recognized the face. Straight back, even steps. The woman who had once carried his entire world on her shoulders, walking alone in the rain. Something ugly uncoiled in his chest. Not guilt, never guilt. Something closer to offense that she was back and looking unbroken. He didn't slow down. He sped up. "Camera out, baby. Watch me put the trash back where it belongs." In the passenger seat, Sloane Prescott had her phone up before he finished the sentence. Filming was her reflex. The tires bit into the wet asphalt. The SUV lurched right, deliberate, surgical, straight into the flooded gutter running along the curb. For half a second, the water hung in the air, a brown wall rising in slow motion, catching the gray light. Then it came down. All of it. Over her hair, down the cream blouse she had worn to the luncheon, across the leather folder in her hands, cold water gritty with road silt running into her collar. "Oh my God, tell me you got that." Sloane's laughter spilled out of the open window, too loud, too long. The laugh of someone performing for a camera. Beside her, Garrett was laughing too, one hand pounding the wheel. On the sidewalk, Camille Kane did not stumble. She did not gasp. She did not raise her hands. She stood absolutely still while muddy water sheeted down her face, and she blinked. Once. That was all. One blink. Remember it. It's coming back. Then she knelt. Not to hide, to work. She opened the folder right there on the wet concrete and checked the pages inside. Donation records, pledge signatures, the morning's work. The leather had taken the hit. The ink had survived. She squared the pages, closed the folder, and rose. And for exactly 1 second, she looked straight into Sloane Prescott's camera. No anger, no tears, no performance to match theirs. Just a look level and unhurried that said something the lens couldn't translate. Then she turned, and she was gone from the frame. Behind the windshield, Garrett's grin faltered. only slightly, only for a moment. Then the light changed. The engine roared, and the SUV carried its laughter away down the wet street. An elderly woman hurried over from the crosswalk umbrella, tilting one hand already reaching out. "Sweetheart? Are you all right?" Camille's fingers tightened around the folder for one breath, the only crack she allowed herself all morning. Then the small smile arrived. "I'm all right. Thank you for asking." The other witnesses stood frozen where the moment had caught them. A man with grocery bags. 2 valets from the corner restaurant. None of them knew her name. All of them would remember her silence. She walked the last block back to the Scottsdale Regent mud drying on her sleeves and stopped under the awning. She took out her phone and made one call. Then she stepped into the lobby. Mud on marble. Heads turned, the quick, hungry turning of people who sense a story. A concierge started forward with towels and an apology. Then he stopped because a man in a dark suit was already moving through the doors behind her fast. "I came the moment you called, Mrs. Kane." The chauffeur, Roland Silver at the temples, 20 years of discretion in his posture, was already sliding his own coat over her shoulders, turning her gently toward the doors. "The car's right outside. Let's get you home." The name dropped into that lobby like a glass hitting marble. Kane. A few heads turned and stayed turned. In the back of the car, Camille watched the city slide past the tinted glass. Her reflection laid over the streets she used to own a piece of. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Roland let me be the one to tell him." Roland nodded and said of course. But in the rearview mirror, his eyes stayed worried the whole ride home. He had driven for the Kane family long enough to know the difference between a secret and a fuse. Because here is what Garrett Voss did not understand as he laughed his way across town replaying the video at every red light. He believed he had splashed a ghost from his past. He had just picked a fight with his future. To understand what that puddle was about to cost you, have to go back 9 years to a rented storefront the size of a 2-car garage with a ceiling that leaked when it rained and a second-hand desk that wobbled unless you folded a napkin under one leg. Back then, Voss Commercial Builders wasn't a company. It was a promise 2 people made to each other over instant coffee. He was Garrett Voss, all license and swagger. She was Camille Ellison, and she was everything else. She read the contracts he skimmed. She remembered the names he forgot. When Garrett walked into a room selling confidence, Camille walked in behind him, carrying the numbers that made the confidence true. Their first year nearly killed them. When the first bank said no, and the second and the third, it was Camille who drove to a pawn shop on the east side with a velvet box in her lap. Inside was her grandmother's jewelry. A ring, a bracelet, 2 brooches, 50 years of family history. She traded all of it for startup capital before lunch. She never told Garrett what it cost her to slide that box across the counter. She just put the check on his desk that afternoon and said they had work to do. Their first real client was a strip mall owner. Nobody else would touch a man famous for suing his contractors. 3 bigger firms had dropped him. Camille won him in one meeting by showing him line by line exactly where projects like his bled money. He never sued. He referred them for a decade. That became the pattern. Garrett closed the room. Camille made sure the room stayed closed. During the county hospital project, the one that put them on the map, she slept on the office couch for 11 nights straight, untangling a permit crisis that would have sunk a lesser firm. In those days, Garrett told anyone who would listen at industry dinners and interviews, "People think I built this company. Truth is, I just signed where she told me to." He meant it back then. Every word. That's the part that makes what came next so much colder, because the money came. First in streams, then in floods, contracts stacked on contracts, industry awards, magazine covers, a $60 million estate on the slope of Camelback Mountain with a garage full of cars he drove twice. And somewhere between the second sports car and the third magazine cover, Garrett Voss began to rewrite his own story. In the new version, he had done it alone. The pawned jewelry became a small early loan when he mentioned it at all. The 11 nights on the office couch became back when things were simple. Her 2-hour meeting with the strip mall king became his instinct for difficult clients. Her fingerprints were on every beam of his empire, and year by year he painted over every single one. Here's the strange thing about a man rewriting history: he's usually the first person to believe the new draft. By year 7, Garrett wasn't lying about who built the company. He genuinely no longer remembered. Then came Sloane Prescott, old money from the California coast, or at least the performance of it. 2 million followers. A life that existed mainly through a lens, private jets, gifted handbags, sunsets with sponsored captions. She had turned herself into a small industry whose only product was envy. Garrett didn't fall in love. He fell in audience. With Camille, he was a man with a history, and histories contain debts. With Sloane, he was only ever the headline version of himself. Of course, he chose the mirror. The affair began the way they always do: late meetings that ran later, business trips that needed no business, a new lock code on his phone, a phone that had never had one. Camille noticed the small things first, the way wives always do. He stopped inviting her to industry dinners, told her they'd gotten boring, that she wasn't missing anything. He found new flaws in things that had never been flaws before. The way she dressed, the way she laughed, the way she'd aged into her 30s. The Sunday family dinners with his mother quietly starved to death on the calendar. When their anniversary came, a gift arrived 2 days late, chosen, wrapped, and signed by his assistant. She fought for it. She suggested counseling, once gently over dinner, once desperately in a parking lot at midnight. Both times he gave her the same answer. He told her he was too busy fixing real problems to sit in a room and invent new ones. That sentence should have told her everything. She gave him 1 more year anyway. Love does that. It keeps paying into an account long after the bank is closed. The truth arrived on an ordinary Thursday. A hotel receipt in a coat pocket she was taking to the dry cleaner. Then his phone left face up on the kitchen island, for once lighting up with a message no colleague sends. Then the photographs, because Camille was still an operator, and when her world caved in, she didn't scream. She documented. Each discovery was a door closing somewhere inside her. Click, click, click. But the betrayal wasn't what broke her. Betrayal a person can survive. People do it every day. What broke her happened months later at a long, polished table across from 2 rows of lawyers on the afternoon the marriage was signed away. The paperwork was almost finished, and Garrett, who hadn't looked at her directly in an hour, suddenly did. He leaned back in his chair, and he delivered the verdict he had clearly been rehearsing for weeks. "You helped build this life, Camille." He let the words sit there. He was enjoying this, she could see it. The lawyers had gone very still. "Then you made the mistake of thinking you belonged in it." Camille didn't answer. She looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at a stranger who happens to be wearing a familiar face, searching for the man who once said he'd just signed where she told him to. He wasn't in there anymore. Then she picked up the pen. The scratch of ink on paper was the last sound of the marriage. She took almost nothing. Not the house, not the cars, not the company she had bled for her lawyer nearly quit over it. A modest settlement accepted mostly to make the meetings stop. Garrett told his circle she was being dramatic about the money. That night, Sloane posted a champagne flute. The caption read, "New chapters." 2 weeks later, Camille packed 1 suitcase, left the keys on the kitchen island, and drove north out of the desert into the pines across the Colorado line. She thought she was fleeing the wreckage of her life. She had no idea she was driving straight toward the best thing that would ever happen to her. Aspen, Colorado gave Camille the one thing Scottsdale never could: quiet. She rented a small place at the edge of town, half the square footage of her old closet, twice the piece. Mornings there smelled like snow and pine instead of ambition. Nobody knew her. Nobody wanted anything from her. For the first month, she mostly slept and walked. But Camille had spent her whole life being useful, and stillness itched. She went looking for work that would tire her hands faster than her mind. She found it with a small nonprofit that restored historic ranch properties damaged by wildfires, burned fences, collapsed barns, 100-year-old homesteads waiting for someone to believe in them again. She understood the assignment better than most volunteers ever would. She was rebuilding something scorched, too. Her first day, she showed up in the wrong boots and worked until her palms blistered. The foreman told her to come back Saturday. She came back every Saturday for 2 years. And that was where she met him. The first time she saw Everett, he was on his knees in the mud resetting a fence post that 2 volunteers half his age had given up on. Worn jeans, work gloves gone gray at the fingertips, no entourage, no introduction, just a nod and a hand steadying the post while she shoveled. For months, that's all he was to her. Everett, the tall, quiet man who listened more than he spoke, who remembered that she took her coffee black and that a certain cologne made her flinch and never wore anything close to it again, who showed up every single weekend, rain, shine, or snow. In her experience, rich men announced themselves. This one just showed up. It was another volunteer who finally told her the truth, half whispering by the tool shed, that the man with dust in his hair was Everett Kane, as in Kane Development Group, as in one of the largest private real estate firms in America, resorts, towers, whole skylines. Camille laughed out loud. Then she looked across the yard at the drywall dust in his hair and realized the volunteer wasn't joking. The story behind the quiet came later in pieces. Years ago, Everett had lost his first wife, suddenly cruelly in the space of a single winter, and the world had not let him grieve. Cameras outside the hospital, photographers at the funeral. His worst day turned into content. After that, he built a wall around his private life and never took it down. His deals made headlines. His face almost never did. In an age when every billionaire performed for an audience, Everett Kane had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. He ran his company the way he mended fences, patiently and by hand. And he had one rule older than his fortune that every executive who worked for him could recite. He never signed with a company until he knew how its people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. His lawyers called it due diligence. He called it common sense. There's a story his people still tell. Years back, Everett spent 3 months courting a partner for a 9-figure development and killed it in one evening after watching the man scream at a parking valet over a scratched bumper. His board called it an overreaction. The smaller firm he signed instead outperformed the deal 3-1. Nobody used that word again. His friendship with Camille grew the way the best ones do, slowly sideways without either of them announcing it. Shared thermoses, long drives out to burn sites where conversations started about lumber prices and ended somehow about loss. He never once made her feel like a project. She never once made him feel like a wallet. In time, she told him everything about her past. The pawn shop, the 11 nights on the office couch, the long table with the lawyers, and the sentence that had been rehearsed for weeks. Everything except one name. He never asked for it. Some names he believed deserved to stay buried. What mattered was the woman who had walked out of that story, not the man who thought he'd written it. 2 autumns after they met, they married at his mountain estate outside Aspen, under Aspen's gone gold, with only family and a handful of trusted friends. No press release, no magazine exclusive, no photograph ever left that mountain. The most private man in American real estate and a woman who had learned exactly what publicity costs. Which is why, 3 years after her divorce, almost no one on earth knew that Camille Ellison had become Mrs. Camille Kane. Back in Scottsdale, Garrett Voss certainly didn't. In his rewritten history, she had simply faded. Now. About that wet Tuesday. That spring, Kane Development Group was closing the largest deal in its history, a project headquartered out of Arizona. For signing week, Everett moved the household south to the family's walled estate in Paradise Valley, 20 minutes from downtown Scottsdale. Camille used the trip for something of her own, a charity luncheon for the Wildfire Fund, the very fund where a widowed billionaire had once fixed fences beside a woman rebuilding her life. She booked the ballroom of the Scottsdale Regent for that Tuesday morning, which is how on a wet Tuesday in March the past and the future ended up on the same sidewalk. 46 hours before the signing. Across town, in a penthouse with a view she never actually looked at, Sloane Prescott sat curled on a white sofa thumb, hovering over the word post, and for 3 full seconds she hesitated. Some instinct older than the followers, older than the filters, whispered that this clip was different, that some doors, once opened, don't close. Then she checked her engagement numbers from the morning. They were down 4%. She posted the video. The caption read, "Some people never learn to stay in their lane. Stay classy, sweetie," followed by a laughing emoji and a splash. For the first hour, it performed exactly the way she'd hoped. Laughing replies from her circle, fire emojis. Then somewhere around the 90-minute mark, the internet turned its head. Strangers started asking who the woman on the sidewalk was. Then they stopped caring because it didn't matter. What mattered was the swerve. Viewers slowed the clip down frame by frame and proved what the naked eye already suspected: the wheel had turned toward the water. The driver had aimed. The comments turned first, then the shares, then the duets and the reaction videos and the lip readers, decoding what the driver said before the splash. By sunset, the clip had escaped her followers entirely and gone global. By midnight, 3 million views. By sunrise, the morning shows had it, and one business reporter had matched the SUV's plates to a company fleet. Garrett Voss, chief executive, Voss Commercial Builders. By Wednesday morning, his name was trending next to a splash emoji. Now, this is usually the part where a story asks you to swallow a miracle. So let's be exact about what was luck here, and what wasn't. At Kane Development Group, a standing order had been running for 6 weeks. Every finalist bidding on Solara Canyon was under review filings, lawsuits, press. Priya, the chief of staff, ran it. She had spent that entire month buried in Voss paperwork, including, as it happened, the company's vehicle registry. The clip never crossed her desk. It found her at 9 that night on her own couch, on her own phone, served up by an algorithm to 100 million strangers, one of whom happened to be the one person alive primed to recognize what she was looking at. She was half watching. Then the license plate filled the frame and she sat up. She knew that plate. She had audited that plate. She scrubbed back, froze the frame on the woman's face, and her blood went cold. She had stood beside that face at the company holiday party. So, yes, luck put the clip in front of her. Preparation did every single thing after. The message she sent upstairs contained 4 words. "Sir, you need to see this." In his study at the Paradise Valley estate, Everett Kane pressed play. He watched the SUV swerve. He watched the water rise and hang and fall. He heard the laughter, both kinds, hers shrieking, his pounding the wheel. And then he watched his wife stand perfectly still in the wreckage of her morning blink, once gather her papers off the wet concrete and leave without a single word. When the screen went dark, he sat unmoving for a long moment. The only sound in the study was the desert wind against the glass. Then he stood, set the phone face down on the desk, and went to find her. Now understand exactly what each of them knew walking into that room. Because this is where 2 halves of the same grenade were about to meet. Everett knew the woman in the video was his wife, and that the man driving was one of 3 finalists bidding for his money. What he did not know was the history between them. Camille knew that the man driving was her ex-husband. What she did not know was that Garrett Voss had spent 6 months chasing a contract funded by the man she married. She was in the sitting room, hair still damp, wrapped in a robe, staring at a cup of tea gone cold. She heard his footsteps in the hall and knew from their weight alone that he had seen it. She had wanted to tell him herself. The internet had been faster. "Why didn't you call me?" There was no accusation in it. That almost made it harder. She looked down at her own hands, steady now, though she remembered exactly how they'd trembled on the drive home. "Because for once, I wanted to walk away on my own 2 feet. He crossed the room and sat beside her, close, not crowding, and took her hand the way he had at every burn site and every hard anniversary. Then he did the thing he was best at. He waited. "The man driving? His name is Garrett Voss. I was married to him." Everett went very still. For 3 full seconds, nothing in the room moved. Something passed behind his eyes, surprise, then recognition, then a third thing that settled in and stayed. And what settled was colder than anger. Camille. He turned her hand over gently in both of his, as if confirming she was real and here and safe. When he spoke again, each word was placed like a stone on a scale. Garrett Voss is one of 3 men bidding to build Solara Canyon. My project. The room seemed to tilt around her. 3 years of distance, a state line, a new name, an entire new life collapsing into a single address. She laughed once, a small, airless sound at the sheer mathematics of fate. He told her the rest plainly, because she was not a woman you softened things for. The bid, the 6 months of courtship, the signing ceremony 2 days away that Garrett Voss was privately telling people he had already won. He didn't make a mistake out there, Camille. He made a choice. He said it barely above a whisper. Quiet from Everett Kane was the loudest register he had. By 9 the next morning, his instruction to legal and finance was simple finish, the Voss review. All of it. What came back before noon shocked even the auditors. Behind the glass tower and the magazine's smile, Garrett's empire was bleeding out. 2 loans already past due. Suppliers stretching into their 4th month, unpaid, 3 of them quietly preparing to file. Layoffs dressed up as restructuring, timed between news cycles. The company was a beautiful building with a cracked foundation held upright by exactly one thing. Solara Canyon wasn't just any contract. It was the largest private resort deal in the Southwest, $12 billion of hotels, residences, and desert skyline. The kind of project that makes a company overnight. Or buries one. Garrett Voss needed that deal the way a drowning man needs a rope. And the rope was tied to Everett Kane's hand. That evening, Everett found her on the terrace, watching the mountains go purple in the dusk. He had 2 questions, and he asked them the way he did everything in order. Thursday, when that screen lights up, 200 people see you at your worst moment. Frozen, 20 feet tall. Are you sure? She didn't look away from the horizon. When she answered, her voice was level. They'll see his worst moment. Mine ended on that sidewalk. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, pride mostly. Then the second question, softer than the first. You don't have to be in that room. She set the teacup down on the stone rail. When she looked up at him, her eyes were clear. I spent 3 years leaving rooms because he was in them. Not this one. He nodded. Once the nod he gave contracts he intended to honor. Then he took out his phone and dialed. Confirm my attendance for Thursday. And add 1 name to the guest list. 38 hours. That same evening across the valley, Garrett Voss was pouring champagne. To understand Garrett, you have to understand the story he told himself, because in that story he was not a man who had betrayed his wife. He was a man who had outgrown his circumstances. Camille had been scaffolding. Necessary while the building went up, taken down when the building was finished. In his mind, that wasn't cruelty, that was construction. You don't apologize to scaffolding, and Sloan wasn't a mistress. Sloan was the life he had earned. Proof in heels and borrowed diamonds that he had arrived at the version of himself he'd always deserved. A man like that doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. He believes he's been promoted. That Tuesday night, in a private dining room at his club, Garrett hosted his senior team for what he called a Victory Eve dinner. The chairs were leather, the steaks were $48, and Garrett rose glass in hand at exactly the moment the video crossed its first 1 million views. In 48 hours, gentlemen, every problem this company has stops existing. The executives raised their glasses. Most of them even smiled. But at the far end of the table, 2 of them exchanged a glance that did not smile at all, the glance of men who had seen the loan schedules and the phones lighting up in every pocket in the room. Wednesday arrived with 4 warnings. Garrett swatted every one of them. The first came at 9 a.m. when his head of communications stepped into the corner office, pale, phone in hand. The video had crossed 10 million views overnight. Reporters were calling the front desk. 2 outlets had already run his name in the headline. The internet has the memory of a goldfish. By Friday, they'll be furious at a soda commercial. He said it with a wave of the hand feet up on the desk and went back to rehearsing his signing remarks. The second warning came at noon, disguised as courtesy. His banker called. "Just checking in," the banker said. "Just confirming the timeline on Solara," the banker said. "Bankers never call to say hello." Garrett heard the nerves underneath the pleasantries and chose not to. The third came mid-afternoon in an email so polite it should have set off alarms. 2 of his own board members requested a meeting. Nothing urgent, the email insisted. Right after the signing would be fine. Board members who ask to meet right after a signing are sharpening something. The fourth warning came at dinner, and it was the only one that reached him for exactly 4 seconds. Across the table, Sloane pushed her food around her plate, then set the fork down. "Maybe I should take the video down." For 4 seconds, Garrett looked at her. For 4 seconds, something buried deep in him, the instant coffee version of him, the one who had once known what danger felt like, stirred and very nearly woke. "Take it down now and we look guilty. It'll blow over. It always blows over." She should have stopped there. She didn't. "People are saying she built the company with you." For a moment, the only sound was his knife against the plate. When he finally answered, his voice was calm, almost gentle. That was the frightening part. "My father spent 30 years being loyal to one company. They laid him off with a fruit basket. He died believing good men get remembered." He cut into his steak unhurried and looked up at her. "I did what climbing costs, sweetheart. I'd do it again tomorrow." Sloane didn't argue. She picked the fork back up and went quiet. And for the first time in their entire relationship, her silence wasn't agreement. It was arithmetic, because a woman who hears a man price out loyalty starts wondering what her own line on the ledger says. It always blows over. That was Garrett's entire theory of consequences. Money was a tide, and tides wash everything clean. What he never understood was that some stains don't wash. They set. That night, in the marble bathroom of his $60 million estate, Garrett Voss stood before the mirror and rehearsed his victory speech. The gratitude warmly rationed, the humility precisely 1 tablespoon, the pause before the word family, which always played well. He rehearsed the speech 4 times until the mirror approved. He never rehearsed an apology. He didn't think he'd ever need one. 19 hours. Thursday. High noon, the grand ballroom of the Scottsdale Imperial Resort. Officially, the event was an award and signing ceremony. The winner of the Solara Canyon project would be announced, and ink would meet paper before the champagne went warm. 3 finalist firms, one $12 billion prize, 200 witnesses, bankers, attorneys, county officials, and rivals who had come to watch somebody else win. Garrett Voss walked in like the announcement was a formality. Custom Italian suit, $9,000 of it. Fresh haircut. Sloane on his arm in a dress that had arrived by courier that morning on loan because designers still answered her calls. For a few more hours anyway. If the room had gone a few degrees colder at his entrance, and it had, he didn't feel it. Winners rarely check the temperature. He leaned toward Sloane as they took their seats near the stage and murmured that in 1 hour none of the noise would matter. She smiled the smile she kept for cameras that hadn't found her yet, and quietly deleted the celebration post she'd drafted in the car. At 12 sharp, the chairman of the project consortium stepped to the podium and departed from the printed program. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we announce today's award, our principal investor has asked to address the room personally." A ripple crossed the ballroom, phones lowered. Somewhere near the back, a silver-haired banker sat up very straight, because in 14 years, the man behind Kane Development Group had never once addressed anything personally. The great doors at the end of the hall swung open. A tall man walked in alone. No entourage, no notes, no smile. And 200 people rose to their feet at the same moment, the instinctive standing you cannot fake, reserved for the one person whose signature makes everyone else's possible. Everett Kane had not attended a public signing in 6 years. That fact alone should have terrified Garrett Voss. Instead, Garrett saw a hand worth shaking. He was out of his seat before Everett reached the stage. Smile at full wattage palm extended the word partnership already halfway out of his mouth. Everett raised one hand. He didn't take Garrett's. He didn't look at it. He simply raised his palm the way you stop traffic, and the entire ballroom understood exactly who owned the air in this room. Garrett's hand hung in the air for one endless second, then found its way back to his side. "Before we discuss business, there's something everyone here should see." He nodded once toward the back of the hall. The chandeliers dimmed. The projection screen woke from black. And there it was, 20 feet tall. The wet street. The SUV drifting right, deliberate, unmistakable at this size, the wheel visibly turning toward the water, the brown wall rising, hanging, falling, the woman on the sidewalk drenched, motionless, and the laughter, Sloane's laughter, pouring out of the ballroom speakers, going on longer than anyone in that room could bear. No one moved. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Somewhere a pen rolled off a table and nobody picked it up. On the screen, the woman knelt, gathered her folder off the wet concrete, rose, looked straight into the camera and blinked once. The screen went dark. The lights stayed low. Everett didn't speak. He stood looking at the black screen a moment longer, the way a man pays respect at a graveside. The silence stretched past comfortable, past bearable. 200 people forgot how to breathe, and the room let them. Then he turned, found Garrett Voss standing frozen beside his table, and said it at a volume barely above conversation, which meant every soul in that ballroom heard it. "The woman you mocked is my wife." The gasp moved through the ballroom in a wave front to back. "That's—" Garrett's hand found the back of a chair and gripped it until his knuckles went white. "That's not possible." But even as the words left him, the arithmetic was finishing behind his eyes. The 3 years he had never once wondered where she'd gone or who had found her. His own voice on that tape telling the world exactly who he was. And then the great doors opened a second time. Camille walked in. Not in armor, not in vengeance. In a simple ivory suit, unhurried spine, straight the invited guest whose name her husband had added to the list 2 nights before. She crossed that ballroom through a silence so complete you could hear her heels on the marble. Every eye in the room followed her. She looked at none of them. She looked at Garrett Voss exactly, precisely the way she had looked into that camera on the sidewalk. 1 second. No anger, no tears. And this time he was the one who flinched and blinked. On the sidewalk, she had knelt to gather her papers, the work she refused to let him ruin. Here, her hands were empty at her sides. She needed nothing in this room. Not an apology, not a microphone, not even a word. She took her place beside her husband and said absolutely nothing. Her silence did all the talking she required. Garrett found his voice somewhere near the floor, and it came out in pieces. That it was years ago. That things had been said in anger. That he never meant that if he had known who she, and there it was, if he had known who she was. The phrase hung in the air like a signed confession, because it told the entire room the only thing that still mattered. The cruelty had been perfectly fine with him, as long as the woman was nobody. Everett let the broken sentence die completely. He let the room hear its silence. Then he answered not Garrett, but everyone. "Kane Development invests in people before buildings. We always have. Money doesn't hide character, Mr. Voss. It exposes it." He turned to the chairman and gave a single nod. The chairman cleared his throat, produced a card that had been printed the night before, and read it into the microphone. "Voss Commercial Builders removed from consideration for the Solara Canyon project, effective immediately." And in the same breath, the award went to Alvarado and Sons Construction, a third-generation family firm out of Tucson. The kind that paid its suppliers early and had kept every last worker on payroll through the crash of 2008. They had been vetted by the same month-long review that had gutted Garrett's books, The same filter that removed one man had just rewarded another. At the Alvarado table, an old man in a bolo tie covered his mouth with both hands. Beside him, his granddaughter, the firm's chief engineer, burst into tears and didn't care who saw. And near the stage, for the first time since anyone in her orbit could remember, Sloane Prescott lowered her phone. There was nothing here she could post her way out of. Garrett Voss stood alone in the middle of 200 people in a $9,000 suit, holding on to the back of a chair as if the floor had tilted. 48 hours after the splash, almost to the minute, the deal was gone. The rest would take 3 weeks. What happened next happened fast. Friday morning, the first bank pulled its emergency credit line. By Monday, the second followed. Banks are herd animals, and the herd was running. The suppliers who had waited 4 months for their money stopped waiting and started filing. 2 anchor clients invoked their exit clauses inside a week, citing in careful legal language reputational considerations. The board meeting that had been scheduled for right after the signing happened anyway. It lasted 40 minutes. When the doors opened, Garrett Voss was no longer chief executive of the company that carried his name. Within the month, his name no longer carried it either. The new owners took the letters off the building on a Tuesday. It rained that day, too. Sloane was gone before the letters were. She deleted the video citing her mental health and posted a statement about growth and reflection. The sponsors left anyway, one by one. The internet that built her simply took itself back. The estate on Camelback went to auction quietly. The cars went one by one. And the small storefront where it all began, the one Camille had stood in front of, on that wet Tuesday testing whether it still had power over her, found a new tenant that spring, a florist. The window filled up with living things. Garrett never drove down that street again. Now come forward. 8 months. Aspen, Colorado. First snow settling on the peaks. The Wildfire Restoration Fund, the same one where a widowed billionaire had once fixed fences beside a woman rebuilding her life, held its winter fundraiser at a lodge outside town. Firelight on timber walls, volunteers in their one good jacket, shoulder to shoulder with 9-figure donors, another charity room, a different life. Garrett Voss was on the guest list. He had put himself there, bought the cheapest ticket available, made a modest donation under his own diminished name, and flown coach to Colorado for one reason. He looked different, thinner. The suit was 2 seasons old. But the real change was the face the salesman's shine had burned off, and what was left looked for the first time in years like an actual person. He found her by the tall windows watching the snow come down. Everett stood a few steps away in conversation, but never out of reach. "Camille," she turned. If she was surprised to see him, she didn't spend any of it on his behalf. She simply waited and let him carry his own silence for once. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to say it to your face. I'm sorry." And for the first time in the 9 years she had known him, there was no performance in it. No angle, no audience. No version of this being rehearsed for later. Just a man standing in the wreckage of his own choices, offering the only true thing he had left. Camille studied him for a long moment. The firelight moved across her face and found nothing hard in it. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, the voice you use at the end of something, not the middle. "You didn't lose that deal because of a puddle, Garrett." She let her eyes travel the room, the volunteers, the donors, the life she had built twice with her own hands, the room he no longer belonged to. Then she came back to him. "You lost it because you forgot how to treat people." He nodded slowly, the way men nod at verdicts they have stopped appealing. "The puddle wasn't the reason. It was the proof." She held his eyes one final second, and there was no anger anywhere in hers, and that was the part that finished him. Then she turned back toward the windows, toward the snow, toward her husband. Everett's hand found the small of her back. They walked away together, unhurried, and did not look back. Garrett watched them go. Then he set his untouched glass down, buttoned his 2-season-old coat, and stepped out into the cold, a man finally carrying the full weight of everything he'd built and everything he'd broken. Here's the thing about that puddle. It didn't change a single person in this story. It revealed every one of them. The way you treat people who can do nothing for you that isn't a moment. That's the whole story told in 1 second waiting for a camera. So, back to the question from the very beginning. If someone humiliated you like that in public, what would you do? Fight back, walk away, and let time do the talking. Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story hit home, do us one favor, subscribe and tap that notification bell. Because around here, karma always keeps its appointments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.